Hey, good morning, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning? Everybody awake? Having your coffee? Welcome to day 3 of CCUMC. If I can get my slide back up there, please. There we go. Okay. So this is day 3. It's Friday. And today's going to be a really fun day. We're going to go off to UNLV. I'm going to talk a little bit. I'm supposed to talk about badges and evaluation. So if you, I guess if you aren't going to UNLV today and if you're going to leave before all the fun starts, make sure you turn your badges in to the registration desk, as well as fill out the conference evaluation form. So the buses for UNLV leave at noon. Actually, it's 11:45. So the way it's going to work is at 11:45, the buses are going to start loading. And because we're kind of short on buses with the number of people that we have, it was a little more people than we expected. The first bus is going to leave right when it gets filled up, and it's going to head to campus. So initially, all the buses were going to leave at noon, so we'll start leaving a little bit early. So if you do show up at 11:45 when buses start loading, you'll head to campus right away. Let's see, for transportation, like I said, we'll have 3 buses. They'll be full. We're going to be going to campus, and we'll be going to Fremont Street Experience at 6:15, and we'll arrive to Fremont Street about 6:45. In regards to the campus, we're going to spend a lot of time on the campus. So I want everybody to go, but if you don't go to campus, you can still get to Fremont Street. So there will be buses going from the Tropicana Hotel to Fremont Street Experience. There'll be 3 of them, one at 8, one at 8:30, and one at 9. So if you don't go to the campus, you can still do that. You can still be at the Tropicana Hotel. Or if you don't go to the campus and you just want to arrive when we all arrive at 7 o'clock, you can always just take a taxi to Fremont Street and then take the buses back to the hotel. Once we get to Fremont Street, there's going to be buses going right back to the hotel starting at 8 o'clock, and they will be going from 8, 8:30, 9, 9:30, 10 o'clock. And so you don't have to stay at Fremont Street if you get a little tired. That's not a problem. We're not going to have any options for storing devices. So I would discourage you to bring like your iPads or laptops or anything like that. Try to pack light when you go to UNLV. Phones are of course okay, unless you want to carry that device with you for the entire day. So Fremont Street, we're going to be doing the zip lining starting at 7 o'clock. We had, as I said yesterday, we had 56 people sign up for the zip lining. It's amazing. So we're going to have 2 groups. One group of 30 folks are going to go at 7 o'clock, and that'll be the folks that originally signed up with me when I sent my email out. The other folks will go at 7:30, okay, and we'll arrange that when we get down there. We're going to have the buffet will be available starting at 7 o'clock. And you don't have to feel, well, you're going to have people ziplining over the top of your head, but don't feel like you have to eat right away, right? So those ziplining, obviously you're doing your thing with the zip lines, but there's a lot of spaces to see at Fremont Street. We got 3 stages that I'll be going. So feel free just when you arrive, you can walk around, check out the spaces, come back to the private area at Fremont Street, and so feel free to roam, and then when you get tired, then you can take a bus back to the hotel. It's very loud at Fremont Street. I will have earplugs if anybody wants them, yeah, so there you go. And our buses are going to be arriving right behind the stage where our private area is, and that's where they're going to depart from as well. And I'd like to now introduce Scott Walker. Scott Walker, CTSD lead, AP, I think you're one of the first consultants with that certification. Has been an independent technology consultant since 1989. For the past 16 years, Scott has been president and CEO of Waveguide Consulting, a leading technology consulting firm providing AV, IT, and acoustical consulting for leading universities, corporations, and government entities. I've known Scott quite a while. When we started looking at Crestron control systems for our campus, Crestron was like, hey, you should talk to these guys. They're really good. And so we did. And I was very fortunate to talk to Scott and start working with him. I haven't done very much with him. I've always wanted to work with him. I haven't had the opportunity, but I have had the opportunity of seeing him speak at a number of events, Infocom events, where he talked about sustainability and green AV, as well as just recently, I was at a UB Tech conference. So UB Tech is it's kind of an offshoot from Infocom. It's more technology focused. And Scott talked at that conference about video and the importance of video and sustainability, and that's kind of interesting. But really, he was talking about the sustainability of us, of universities, basically, where there's a lot of disruptive technology out there that's impacting universities, Western governors. We're seeing it come from all sides. And so Scott did a really interesting discussion about that. And so I think we're very fortunate to have Scott here. And Scott.
Thank you. Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate it. One of my favorite movies of all time is City Slickers. Anybody like that film? It's definitely in my top 25. And sort of the central theme of that movie is summed up in the talk that Billy Crystal's character, Mitch, gives to Daniel Stern's character, Phil, about the do-over. And in a lot of ways, I'm thankful for Daryl for giving me a do-over, because I spoke to you guys 4 years ago on this very topic. And the first thing I did when Daryl called is I went back and I looked at that PowerPoint and I went, oh, Scott, you were so young. If you only knew then what you know now. So I get a chance to sort of correct the record. It's not that I was wrong. I just didn't know what I didn't know about the future at that point. So I'm going to try to present a update on where we are with sustainability. But I want to look at it through several lenses, as Daryl mentioned. Yes, there's the classic definition, the UN definition about meeting current needs without jeopardizing the needs of future generations to meet their needs. And certainly that's the driving factor behind sustainability. But I think there's a couple of other lenses we need to look at this through. One is, how are your institutions going to survive? The disruptive technology, the economic climate, the cost of higher education is causing us to rethink the model. And that's near and dear to everyone in this room. Obviously, this is where you make your living. And that's the third lens, is your position on your campuses and how to actually increase your value to the campus. I know in the state of Georgia, where I live, our Board of Regents recently did a survey and found that more than half of the monies they spend on higher ed go to salaries. That's probably not too surprising. What they were surprised by is that has been going up every year, even though they've been cutting the funding for institutions. And so, obviously there's a mismatch there, and at Tom Begg's institution, UGA, they're talking about laying off 130 people to deal with this mismatch, and they're probably not going for those tenured faculty folks first. So, what I want to help you do, what I want to help all of us do, is help people appreciate that our industry and the talents that we bring to the party can help align with the sustainability goals of the institutions you work for. But it takes a radical shift in thinking, and that's what we want to talk about today. Back in 2009, all the talk, all the energy, all the oxygen in the room was about LEED. And for good reason. It's an amazing program and certainly got off to a flying start. But to be quite honest, for those of us in technology and AV, we were in the weeds, metaphorically there. LEED was not a fertile ground for us to plant our seed, though we tried for about 2.5 years working directly with U.S. Green Building Council. Ultimately, they said in 2010, why don't you guys come back in 2013, we'll talk to you again, and that was just an unacceptable proposition for us. So we moved on, and I'll talk about where we moved since 2008. But another interesting thing was going on back then that I talked a little bit about in my talk in 2008 that always kind of piqued my interest. But I have to tell you, in preparing for this talk, I did another deep dive into the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, and it blew me away. And the energy and work that's going on in that arena is multiples, 10x what the LEED initiative is. LEED is part of the President's Climate Commitment, but it's not the centerpiece of it. And this is where I think we have a chance to make a statement. So as many of you may know, the President's Climate Commitment is a commitment that university and college presidents have made to bring their campuses to carbon neutrality. And as those of you know who make your living there, that's a big deal. Many of you have hundreds of buildings, thousands of staff, tens of thousands of students. The carbon footprint of that is enormous. And so when you look at trying to bring that to zero, boy, we better be thinking outside the box to do that. And basically, there's a four-step plan that the President's Climate Commitment has. First is you have to create a team, a steering committee on your campus to look at this. You have to do a greenhouse gas inventory of your entire institution. And that could be multiple campuses, multiple countries even, of greenhouse gas emissions you're getting your arms around. Then you have to come up with a climate action plan. And all this has to be done within the first 2 years of signing the commitment. So hundreds of institutions signed the commitment in 2008, 2009, and the thing that's changed is they've done all these inventories now, and they've created their action plans. And reading those action plans was really eye-opening for me. And then basically you have to work the plan to get to carbon neutrality. So here's just some interesting fun facts I learned the way, and this thing is really starting to take off. There are 660 colleges and universities who have signed the climate commitment. And that's up from 582 just 4 years ago. And so in this incredibly tough economic climate, you still have, 80 more institutions that are signed up to this President's Climate Commitment to go carbon neutral. And they boast on the website that 1 out of 3 college students currently goes to school at a campus that is planning to go carbon neutral. And that's humongous because this isn't just about buildings, it's about curriculum, it's about programs, it's about what type of degrees, infiltrating into business and medicine and every realm of science. So we are educating the next generation to solve this problem that previous generations have foisted upon them, and that's a very, very big thing. And so I went a little further and looked, and of the 95 or so institutions that are here, half of you come from campuses that have signed the President's Climate Commitment. And you may or may not be aware of that. One of the things that was a little depressing, because I started to read all of the action plans. And I rarely saw people with titles like you guys have on the steering committees or even participating in those action plans. And sure, you guys have a lot of PhDs on your campuses, and they're certainly going to do what they do best, but that they didn't engage the IT staff and instructional technology staffs to the degree I think they should have is I think, a big oversight. Now, some of you come from institutions that didn't sign the climate commitment, but here was the heartening thing. I went to every institution's website and did a search on green, sustainable, LEED, and 95% of the institutions on their website talk about their sustainability program. And many of them do it right on the homepage about us, and in the top 5 or 10 things they want to tell prospective students, they talk about sustainability. That's a huge thing. Right up there with academics and athletics, and on that list is sustainability. So your institutions are doing the right thing and putting the right foot forward, and I think are in a unique situation to transform society in our view of this issue. The question is, what role do we all play? And that's really the focus of my talk today. So in each of these studies, you'll see some sort of pie chart about greenhouse gas emissions and those that are coming from the electricity that's being purchased or other fossil fuels. The thing that's stunning to me is the amount of greenhouse gases through travel. And particularly, I was stunned by how much air travel is done. Almost, half of the commuting travel is going to air travel in most of these studies. So a lot of flying that goes on in higher ed. Maybe that's sports teams traveling around the country or something, but, and some of that can't be avoided, but where it can be for maybe going to virtual conferences instead of physical conferences and teaching at a distance, I think there's some things we can do. And I scanned dozens of the climate action plans. Very rarely did I see a heavy mention of AV and video conference distance learning technologies, but that's an obvious thing. And at University of Washington, on their climate action plan, they did call out this is a key strategy, is to develop video conferencing as an alternative to physical travel for their faculty and staff. But there's lots of cool things when you dive in, and I encourage any of you guys to do this. Arizona State, they have this whole campus metabolism thing. So they're treating it like a biological entity, their campus. And within each building, there is a building dashboard, but it talks about how much energy it's consuming and what it's providing for the campus. And one of the cool things they have on the ASU website is this notion of a footprint for an office and a dorm room, where you can turn on and off virtual devices and watch how many watts, how many pounds of carbon, and how many dollars you're spending if you're leaving these devices on. Same with the dorm room. I was just hoping for that one more link that showed the classroom and said, on campus we have 300 plus classrooms, and here's how much energy each of those guys is consuming. And when we leave racks on at 3 in the morning because we just never got around to intelligently switching them off, here's how much energy they're consuming for no benefit at all. I'm hoping ASU will add that one more button and show what type of footprint classrooms have. And at Tulane, they talk to students about, here's the video conference tools we will support you with, so you don't always have to travel to campus to work on a project. You guys can work virtually, and we'll support you with these video conference tools to empower you to do that, both with people at this campus and other campuses. So I do see that the message is kind of getting out there, but not in the robust way that I think it needs to be thought through. So all the climate action plans have a chart that essentially looks like this. And if you look, the blue is this business as usual chart that says, well, as our campus continues to grow, as we continue to add students, if we don't change our ways, this is what our carbon footprint will look like in 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And then the action plans are all about the brown chart. How do we get to carbon neutrality over that time frame? And I'll have to tell you, I love higher ed. I've worked on hundreds of higher ed jobs, and they're the most optimistic people in the world. Some of these climate action plans go to the year 2099. So I want to just pause and think about that for a minute. Not only are they saying they're going to still be around in 2099, they're still going to be working this plan 87 years from now. They're going to be this close to getting there in 87 years. I just thought that was the most optimistic thing I've ever heard. So, but when you start thinking about cutting energy in half, and then half again, and then half again, and half again, it gets very difficult. You can't do it by thinking traditional ways about, well, we'll just take this one building and replace it with this other building that's 25% more efficient. You never get to neutrality. And you end up buying millions of dollars worth of carbon credits and calling it neutral. So, to my mind, the argument is, why are we wasting any unnecessary watts? And why are we buying offsets that we don't need to buy? It would be like leaving the light on in the refrigerator 24 hours a day, even though no one's opened the door to see what's inside. That's essentially what we do with AV systems. Yeah, we turn off the projectors, but very few systems. When I go around the country and do assessments for universities, very few of them are doing full intelligent management, where only the device you need turns on when you need it and everything else stays off. So the other reason we can't just rely on LEED, there's a lot that LEED leaves out. And it's just not in their purview to think about the granular operations of a building. So one of the things that LEED has done that's a very good thing, a traditional building, the two biggest consumers of energy are HVAC and lighting. And, followed kind of sort of by plug loads, although that's always sort of we don't really know what that is, but we'll just say that's 25% of the building load. Well, with LEED, HVAC and lighting systems have become incredibly more efficient. But LEED doesn't give you any points for managing plug loads, so guess what? They don't get managed. And now the dirty little secret is that plug loads are getting larger and larger in the building. So the MEP engineers who are doing the energy models for the building, they're just throwing the same old factor at this, and they're not actually thinking through, well, we have a data center on the 3rd floor, and we have a broadcast facility on the 1st floor, and we have 60 classrooms in this building. What does that mean to the energy consumption of this building? We'll just throw in 25% for plug loads and move on. It actually could be quite a bit more than that, as this study from Legrand pointed out. The other thing is that LEED doesn't really deal with travel offsets from video conferencing. And we at Infocom wrote a credit for LEED version 3. They didn't accept it. When I moved into our new office at Waveguide, I collected all the video conference data for a year. Every call we made that would have been travel, summed it all up. It was, 75 or so trips we avoided by doing video conferencing. Counted up all the carbon, and basically they said, yeah, that's not really worth a point. Yet they have a point for a bike rack. But they don't for taking airplanes out of the sky. So that's a big oversight within LEED. E-waste is a huge problem on this planet. 60 Minutes did a heartbreaking expose on this a few years ago, but we kind of view electronics as these disposable devices. You use them for a while, you crack the screen on your phone, and you chunk it somewhere. And really, we have to have a much more responsible expression of what we do with technology at end of life. And I'm heartened to see that some manufacturers like Wolf Vision have always had a program for a take-back program. It's just in their DNA. And other manufacturers like Extron, and as we all became aware of these issues, have started take-back programs. And then they can responsibly recycle used electronics. I wrote an article on this a few years ago, but I'm imagining in the basement of many media centers around the country, maybe yours is one of them, there is just shelves and shelves full of old AV gear as you've replaced analog with digital, as you've replaced old projectors with new, and you may not have a good way of getting rid of that stuff. And the problem in the U.S. is we have a patchwork quilt, 50 different versions of that, because each state has its own requirements versus a single program for the country. But there are providers out there now that there's been more awareness about this, that can help you guys responsibly get rid of that equipment and have it be recycled. The other thing that is kind of eye-opening when you look at LEED, it doesn't really promote smart buildings. There aren't credits for integrated building technologies, tying in your room scheduling software with motion sensors, with AV software that can manage your AV power load, your set points for your HVAC, your lighting, your shades. All that should be one big brain in your building. And LEED doesn't really incentivize that type of thinking. You don't get points for it. Anything you don't get points for is costing somebody on the design team extra effort for no additional points. This is one of the challenges with LEED. And lastly, someone mentioned earlier paper, and just the unbelievable amounts of paper that get wasted that we could basically replace through the use of technology. Again, LEED doesn't really get down into the operations day-to-day of that type of thing. Well, the good news is there is a system out there that does, and that's the STEP rating system. So this was an initiative started at Infocom, but now has 5 major trade associations behind it. So, Infocom, Bixby, TIA, CompTIA, and now Cabling Association that is looking at their industry and how they fit into this. So I don't have time today to go through the entire STEP rating system point by point, but let me just kind of talk structurally about what STEP's all about. Like LEED, you earn points by doing various things through the project, and this strictly deals with technology. So there's no real overlap with LEED, and so it complements LEED. It picks up where LEED leaves off. One of the things we do a little bit differently in STEP, though, is that we go through the project phase by phase, because we need to start at earliest program phase and work our way through infrastructure design, through system design, through integration, and through operations, and make sure, if you're going to end up with a building dashboard that is monitoring and reporting energy consumption in your building, well, that needs to be budgeted up front. The data drops need to be provided for that. The integrated building technologies need to be thought through. The hardware needs to be spec'd. It needs to be set up by the software programmer properly, and then you guys can do that every day. You can't just wait to the end and go, oh, geez, we should have done some building monitoring and measurement displays in the lobbies. So for instance, in program phase, most projects begin with an AV program report, or at least they should. We think that's a good thing. That's credit P4. You get points for just doing what is already an AV industry best practice. But credit P5 says, okay, you've done a budget and a program. How much energy is that system going to consume over 5 years? And what mitigating factors can you put in to manage that energy load? So don't just look at first costs, look at ongoing costs. So you would estimate how many hours a day you plan to use these classrooms based on historical data, and then you would look at how can we put in motion sensors and scheduling software to manage that energy load so that we're not overburdening the carbon footprint of the institution through use of this technology. In infrastructure phase, this is mainly dealing with the building elements, so things like HVAC, heat load calculations, and accurate energy power calculations. So we're not overcooling spaces, we're not overpowering spaces way beyond what we need. The New York Times just did a big piece on data centers and how they're being over-designed so much that it's just having this huge impact on greenhouse gas emissions and energy consumption. So what we're promoting here is the accurate calculation of these measures. And, you know, if it's a renovation project, as you guys know, particularly on the public institutions, a lot of the new construction has slowed down, so you're going to be doing a lot more renovation. So, you know, one of the credits here is there any existing infrastructure we can reuse? Are there cable trays or racks or speaker back cans that are completely fine to be reused? We don't need to throw everything out and replace it with the exact same thing. Let's see what we can reuse and reapply to this project. When we get to system design, now we're talking about speccing out the hardware that's energy efficient. So we're favoring Energy Star or TCO, total cost of ownership rated products. We're promoting the intelligent management of systems so that you can operate your plant remotely, you can troubleshoot it remotely, and you know, that's fewer truck rolls every time there's an issue because the integrator or the software programmer or you or the consultant can dive into a system and diagnose it from afar. When we get to systems integration phase, now the integrator is the primary person, or yourself if you also integrate your own systems and program them on campus. So now we have to do the work of, if we are recycling equipment, this is where you're taking the old equipment, or the integrator would, as part of their bid, part of their proposal, to take the old equipment and responsibly recycle it as they're putting in new equipment, and to program the systems for intelligent remote management. So, you know, these are best practices that many of you actually probably already institute anyway, but now we have a rating system that gets its arms around that comprehensively. And lastly, unlike LEED, we have a full operations phase. And you'll see all those black dots in that column to the far right. That's you guys, the technology managers, who are taking all of the tools that you've been given to do monthly reports of travel offsets, and to do your energy management reports, and network management reports. You know, are we over-specifying networks? Are we over-specifying AV equipment? Are we not even using half the gear? There was a conversation earlier about you know, old equipment. Well, do we continue to specify equipment that people don't need and don't use? That's wasteful. That's non-sustainable. So, you know, through the reporting types of software that are out there, you can better estimate what equipment you actually need, and then be able to show your higher-ups, okay, well, actually, you know, 12% of the people do use the DVD player in the lectern versus their own DVD drive in their PC, so perhaps we should keep specifying those. Or maybe we just need to train people that they can use the PC's DVD drive, and they actually get some features there they don't get from a DVD player. So if you look at the breakdown of what STEP addresses, the points per phase are fairly evenly meted out, and there's a number of topics, things like reducing travel, lowering your energy consumption, integrated building technologies or smart building technologies, which are about 30% of the credits. So we're heavily promoting the idea of integrated buildings, whereas LEED doesn't really address it. And, you know, again, it's another hour-long conversation to talk about all the what's behind STEP, but if you go to the stepfoundation.org, you can learn about the program, you can see the organizations involved with it. There's a frequently asked questions, and we have pilot projects going on today. My firm is currently working on 4 different STEP projects. So this is out and about, and you guys have the opportunity to recommend or specify that your service providers go through the STEP process on your next project. But let's go back to this notion of institutional survivability, institutional sustainability, and I do this with a little progression I call a history of dinosaurs. So the first dinosaur we're going to talk about are, well, the dinosaurs, because they're the poster children for this. So in the words of Sting, they were God's favorite creature, but they didn't have a future. Big, lumbering giants, you know, kings of the planet, but too slow-moving, unable to adapt to the what was coming at them that they just couldn't see. So it was the nimbler, more adaptable mammals who survived. And the question is, you know, what does this mean for the built environment? Well, let's look at a couple of built environment dinosaurs, things we don't build anymore that we used to build by the millions of square feet. So this is a sad picture of the Tower Records in Atlanta before its demise. And back in my rock and roll days, I actually played a gig at that Tower Records. And this is when it was shuttering. And So what's the nimble mammal that did in all the tower records? Well, iTunes. I haven't bought a physical CD in years. Probably many of you haven't either. And so in 2006, bye-bye Tower Records and flipping through the bins to find, old, bootleg copies of Rolling Stones albums or something. Well, anybody know what that building is or was? Yep, Circuit City. I love this apocalyptic photo of these bike-wielding middle schoolers just roaming through the parking lot. And you think about what that parking lot looked like 10 years ago, there would have been, minivans and SUVs pulled into that, and people just shoving speakers and audio amps and flat-screen TVs in the back of those guys. And now it's shuttered. And what did it in? Well, commoditization, Walmart, a cheaper price down the street for the same thing. You could say, well, it was Best Buy, but Best Buy is just the current Circuit City. So if you can get it cheaper somewhere else, that's where you're going to get it. So in 2008, Circuit City bit the dust. Blockbuster. So Friday nights at my house used to mean on the way home from work, you go by Blockbuster, you pick out a movie to watch and some popcorn to pop, and this was what you do for date night when you have young kids at home. And that was a standard issue fare for my wife and I during the very analog era of this is how you watched movies. Well, what did in Blockbuster? Well, Netflix and Amazon Video and iTunes and lots of other things where now you can just get that stuff streamed right to your TV. You don't need to go down and wait in a line and realize that the movie you wanted isn't on the shelves and hope somebody turns one in while you're standing there so you can take it home and watch it. So in 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy and bit the dust as a bricks and mortar institution. So the giants are falling now steadily. Borders. So this is a heartbreaker. I used to love to just go through bookstores, and I could do all my Christmas shopping at a Borders and get something for my mom and my dad, brothers, sisters, and get a good coffee while you're there and maybe stumble upon some book and buy yourself a little something. Well, obviously the thing that did in Borders was Amazon and all the ways you can buy stuff online. Again, I haven't bought a physical book in a long time. I just download stuff to my iPad and read it that way. So just last year, Borders files bankruptcy, and we don't build Borders bookstores anymore. So what about these places? Surely not these places. These are kings of the planet. This is the envy of the world. People come from all over to come to these institutions. I mean, what could possibly threaten these guys, right? Well, everything threatens these guys. Just look at the cost of higher ed. And again, you guys work inside of this every day, but when it's $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 a year for room and board and everything, tuition to send your kid off to college, it's just getting out of the reach of the average American. And at some point, that system just breaks down, and people are going to find an alternative way to get educated. Look at the kids coming into school, the millennials. And by the way, I don't recall that we Gen Xers had a logo, but I guess they're cleverer than us. They get a logo. But, they've been Google searching and playing with mobile devices and all this since they were kids, little kids. So now they're going to come to an institution and sit in a 300-seat lecture hall and learn Chemistry 101. I don't think that's going to work for a whole lot longer. I think we got to rethink that. And the world is rethinking that. If you look at Coursera and edX, which both announced and launched in April-May timeframe of this year, those are seismic shifts. That's, MIT and Harvard and Princeton and Yale and Pennsylvania and lots of, top-shelf institutions that are now putting their classes online, currently for free, and currently not awarding credit hours for it. But it's, in my mind, just a flip of a switch to say, okay, if you actually want to earn that robotics credit hour from Stanford, pay this nominal fee. And with that Stanford robotics course, I actually watched about 30 minutes of that lecture. As soon as they put that course online, I think something like 100,000 people signed up for it around the world. So versus teaching 100 people in a bricks and mortar classroom, suddenly 100,000 people around the world went, yes, I'd like to take that course, please. So it's a big world out there, and I think this is what the folks behind Coursera and edX and Udacity and to some extent Khan Academy, although I think they have a slightly different mission. But I think this is what they realize. It's a big planet, and there's a growing middle class in China and India and other countries that want this education, but they're not going to, in big enough numbers, keep saving for generations to send their kid to a Georgia Tech or an MIT if they can get it free online through the same means that we get movies and music and books and all those other things. So, in reality, is there university really all that different than the other bricks and mortar institutions that we don't build anymore? If you look at what felled those giants, those dinosaurs, it was some mix of commoditization of information or goods or services, combined with a digital distribution network of content, combined with high-speed networking. As soon as you could download a book in 30 seconds, you didn't go to the bookstore anymore. As soon as you could download an album in a minute, you didn't go to Tower Records. As soon as you could stream a movie instantly to your screen, you don't go necessarily buy that movie at a store anymore. So, is there anything about Chemistry 101 that isn't a commodity? No, it's a commodity. People are going to get that the cheapest way they can so they can get to Chemistry 201 and then 301. And if that can be provided to your apartment, to your house through streaming media, and you can get the credit hours for it, and it doesn't cost you $40,000 a year, you're going to do that. And so I think everyone in this room has to think, well, what does that mean for us? And as I thought about that, we're all familiar with the theory of evolution. There's a sort of tangent theory to that called catastrophism, that evolution it's much more about survival of the fittest survivors. Those that survive the catastrophe and adapt are what shapes history. So, how does your institution become one of the fittest survivors? And so the light bulb kind of went off for me that if you're going to remain viable and healthy in this environmentally aware era, again, 95% of your institutions are promoting sustainability on your home pages or websites. This economically stressed environment where the cost of education is outpacing the middle income, in this country, and in this Coursera era where content is becoming available online for free or cheap, the only way you can stay viable is to become a top-shelf, top-tier video-empowered institution. You have to be in the video creation business. You have to be in the content creation business. You need to be licensing and selling that content, not only to your students, but students at other institutions, and partnering with those other institutions, as is happening with Coursera and edX and Udacity, to create these networks of institutions. And that puts you guys right in the crosshairs, because this is what you do. And these are good crosshairs. And this is where I think your value proposition can jump and can tick off all those things of environmentally conscious, economically smart, and aware technologically of the delivery mechanisms out there today. So let's talk briefly about how projects actually go and how they should go. So I've worked on 250, 300 or so higher ed projects. Here's how I would say 99% of them go. Let's say you're going to build a new nursing school or a new business school or a new math and science building. Basically what happens, somebody does an inventory and they say, well, what do we have now? Okay, well, our nursing school is 150,000 square feet, and we have a 300-seat auditorium and a 150-seat and a couple of 75s and a couple of 30s and so many labs. So the design team says, well, are you planning for growth? Yeah, we think we're going to grow the program 10 or 15%. And everybody goes, okay, well, then we need to build a 330-seat auditorium and a 175-seat lecture hall and turn those 30s into 40-seat rooms. And basically, we're just going to blow up your building and build you a new one that's bigger. And that's that business as usual trend. That's just doing the same thing over and over. And you're not going to get to the carbon neutrality your presidents have provided or promised by doing that. And, I see it time and again. They end up stuffing more and more into the building, and then they go, well, we got 2 or 3% left over for AV. Is that going to be enough? And that's the total wrong way of looking at this in this Coursera era, to think about higher ed as, let's just build 10% more building and we're done. I think the way projects should go is we should start with $0 and 0 square feet. Don't even start with what you have today. Start with nothing and craft a vision of how you're going to teach nursing or business or law or whatever to future generations, and really get your head around that. And then determine what spaces you need to do that. And then budget your technology first, because you got to have that or there's no delivery, and then figure out how much you have left over for the building. Because the types of spaces that you need to create may be very different. You may need a lot of video origination studios, stand-up studios to digitize and ingest content. That may become a big part of new projects on your campuses. You may have, dozens of these across your campus, so you can ingest enough content at a rapid enough pace, because information changes. You can't just ingest it once. Something like robotics changes. You got to keep that content fresh. And turn classrooms into active learning environments. Scale up, Teal, it goes by many names, but this is where a lot of the energy is. the notion of flipping the classroom. Watch the lecture at home. Come to the classroom to do your group work, your homework. Do that in class. And this is a room we recently did at Georgia Tech with Chris Hamlin that I think is a very successful expression of that, using wireless technology. Each group has their own display. And the teachers who teach in here, I've heard them say, we walk in the room, the kids are already working in groups. They already have their content up on the screens. They're already solving problems. And I can just go around and actually individually teach folks versus lecture at a bunch of blank stares and everyone's checking their Facebook status while I try to lecture to them. And we need a whole lot more group study rooms. If you think about what we do in the real world, none of us sits and works in isolation for 30 years. Everything we do is a team, a group. So why do we educate and test people individually? Why aren't we having them figure out in college, oh, I'm a project manager kind of person, or I'm a number cruncher, or a researcher, or I'm a presenter sort of communicator. Higher ed doesn't, I think, spend enough time helping people figure out who they are and what they want to do. We train engineers as if they're all going to do the exact same job, and that's not true. Same with architects. We teach them how to draw buildings. Who teaches them how to manage projects and manage budgets and manage teams? That's a skill that needs to be learned in college. And fundamentally, I think we're looking at the wrong measurements, the wrong metrics when we talk about our carbon footprint on these campuses. And I think a subtle change in how we define our units of measure can change everything. So when I put up here a Twinkie, what's a unit of measure you guys think about when you see a Twinkie? Calories per serving, right? That might be where you start, and then you look at grams of fat and sugar and carbohydrates and all that. When you look at this car, the first spec you probably think of is miles per gallon, right? So when you think about these things, diplomas, credit hours, what's the right metric for this? And I would put forth that the right metric is pounds of carbon per credit hour. That if we changed our thinking and we said, okay, I just earned 4 credit hours in mathematics for this differential equations course. How many pounds of carbon was that? That would change the conversation. So instead of just assuming we have buildings and assuming we have FTE students, what we're really producing are credit hours. That's the product of it, that's the tangible product. There's also soft products of helping young people grow and become part of the community and become good citizens, but the tangible product is credit hours. That's how you graduate. So I did a little, made up some math, just picked George Mason University because I was reading their action plan at the time and looked at their reporting and just applied this metric. So in 2009, their metric ton of CO2 equivalent was 105,000 metric tons, which if you multiply it by 2,200 pounds per metric ton, you get 232 million pounds of carbon that they have to produce every year to do what they do. So in the same report, they say they have 32,000 students. And I don't know the full mix of part-time, full-time, grad, whatever. But I just said, let's suppose they earn 15 credits per semester or 30 a year on average. So that would be 960,000 credit hours. So if you take 232 million divided by 960,000, you get 243 pounds for every credit hour earned, okay? Let's assume that's our new miles per gallon. And what I would put forth is if we thought about it this way, and if a university president were to say, well, how do we get that to zero? How do we get that to be 0 pounds per credit hour? Somebody would go, well, what if we didn't meet face-to-face all the time? What if the Monday, Wednesday, Friday classes only met 2 times a week in person, and the other time is streamed to them wherever they are? What if the Tuesday, Thursday classes only meet face-to-face once a week? Well, guess what? Suddenly, 3 days a week, you have 33% too many classrooms. And 2 days a week, you have 50% too many classrooms. You have twice as much campus as you need because you have half as many people come into class. Holy cow. You mean we could start talking about tearing down old, inefficient buildings because we've changed the delivery mechanism? Still giving good content, still giving students a way to interact and collaborate with their professor, maybe even a better way of doing it, because if they watch the lecture online, they can pause, go to the bathroom, come back, rewind. I want to listen to that a couple of more times. It's a whole different thing than I heard. When I went to engineering school, basically the teachers would write on the board, and I always felt like they had the eraser in the other hand. And as soon as I wrote it down, it was gone. And I would go home at night, and I would try to figure out what all these scribbles were, these hieroglyphics were. and I'd study till 2 in the morning because I couldn't listen in class. I just had to write down the notes. That's not a good way to learn stuff. So I think, looking at flipping the classroom, making the lecture the thing you do at home, and making classrooms or campuses much more about collaboration, well, we might not need these hulking auditoriums, these humongous buildings to do what we do. Ergo, the carbon footprint goes way down. Ergo, you guys become the central enablers of that future because you're the folks who capture that content, digitize it, distribute it, store it, put the metadata tags on it, help people navigate it, and hey, suddenly you're central to that mission. So I'm going to end with just my recommendation to your fine consortium here. And this is just one man's opinion. I'm not a member of CCUMC. This is what you guys do. But coming from an Infocom perspective, I want to share with you what worked for Infocom. So I think you should start your own CCUMC-CC, which will go down as the worst acronym in the history of acronyms. But the CCUMC climate commitment. And you could model it after the American College and University President's Climate Commitment, which is also the worst acronym ever. But what would that look like? So let me just fill in the pieces of the pie here. The first thing you guys could do, and you're already structurally set up to do this, is create a SIG or a task force, whatever the appropriate thing is, within CCUMC to spearhead this climate commitment and get your institutions thinking about how you guys can attach what you do on your campuses to the larger thing that's happening with the President's climate commitment. And then at each of your institutions, form your own AV, IT, video task force. You maybe got to get the AV folks from the med school and the business school and the law school, as well as the central campus folks and the video folks, and form a group and elect yourself chair, and then start working on your climate plan. Next thing you can do, and this would be a huge boon to the industry, is conduct or create an AV greenhouse gas inventory. One of the challenges as we go talk to folks like the EPA, or I got to be part of a presentation for a U.S. House caucus on high-performance buildings, is we don't know the baseline. We don't have this data. You guys can get this data. And it doesn't have to be super hard. You can go down to Home Depot, buy a $20 watt meter, and just start measuring devices. You probably have campus standards. Just go figure out what your projectors are consuming, the racks in your lecterns, the rack in the rack closet. And you'll know from Lamp Life how many hours these systems are on, and start to create a database of what the energy consumption, the heat load of your campus AV classrooms are. And you could probably employ students to do this. Most of you guys already on your campus have some sort of student group that deals with sustainability. Go get them to do it for free. That's, they're young. They can climb on ladders and stuff. And so this doesn't have to be expensive. Now, the right way to do it would be to put real energy monitors in each rack and be logging hours and which devices are on and off at which times, and creating that full data logging. But if that's too big of a burden for 300 plus classrooms, just start simple. Just go measure a prototypical room, and from Lamp Life determine how many hours it's on. So the next thing is share your inventories. And like I said, this would be a huge boon to the STEP Foundation and to anybody involved in sustainability in this arena, because now we have data to better upon. We don't know how much better we're getting if we don't know where we're starting from. So having a baseline would just be fantastic and would elevate you guys, to a very privileged seat at the table at Infocom and these other associations for collecting this data. So then you would create your AV climate action plan. Are you really deploying Fusion RV or RMS to its full extent? Are you tying in motion sensors to all your AV racks? Are you using scheduling software to determine when systems can be turned on and off so that people don't come in, watch a movie, leave something on all weekend, and burn a bunch of lamp hours? I would put forth to you that you guys can change the sustainability world with one simple thing. In your next RFP, say that you require the project to obtain at least STEP Bronze rating. Suddenly, all your service providers, all your consultants, all your manufacturers, all your integrators are going to go, oh, I actually have to do this now to comply with the RFP? Okay, well, I guess I better get myself together on this. and suddenly, you guys could have this seismic shift on the STEP Foundation and how we're trying to deal with adoption, because you represent this huge buying power. Universities are small cities. They have huge numbers of buildings, and if you guys can pull the trigger on this, it would have a seismic ripple effect through the industry. And the benefit of doing that climate action plan is also you can now attach your efforts to your campus's efforts. The climate action plans are updated every year or two, and on the next update of the plan, you can say, hey, I've done an inventory of the 300 plus classrooms on campus, and we can include that in the next study. And then that gets at figuring out how to chip away at this carbon footprint. And, lastly, I think you could take a page from a lot of the dorm competitions that are happening on many of your campuses, where the dorms are looking at, having these energy management competitions to see which dorm can manage their energy the best. I've read about students who realize, geez, why are we keeping the Coke machines on from 1 a.m. to 7 a.m.? No one's buying a Coke at that time, so they put timers on the Coke machines. So you got dorm A trying to outduel dorm B to save energy. Well, why don't you guys set up a competition between George Mason, University of Washington, Stanford, all you guys, and figure out what your number is, what your pounds of carbon per credit hour is, and figure out who are the shining stars in that, and see what you can do to lower that year by year. So with that, I'll just close to say I think the next step is up to all of us. The tools are here now. LEAD wasn't our tool. We have a tool in STEP now. We have the President's Climate Commitment. You have a platform upon which to attach these initiatives. And I think the next step is up to us. The door is open, and we just need to walk through it. So with that, I will take any questions you have, or you can feel free to email me after the session. Thank you. So Daryl, you going to prime the pump?
Is there any questions? Anybody have questions for Scott? I guess I got a question. So, the whole idea about an integrated building, right? So
right.
That's great. But the problem that we have is as soon as we start putting all of these things together, then all of a sudden it's kind of like we have to support it, right? Mm-hmm. So, all of a sudden lighting is integrated and all these things are integrated together. And, just trying to do the jobs that we do every day is just killing us, right? Yeah. So we got 200 classrooms, and they want to cut staffing, and everybody's bringing in iPads and everything else, and so they want to get this signal on the projector, and we got to figure that out, right? They want HDMI and DVI and all this other stuff, right? And then I got to worry about I've already got my screens going up and down. I got to deal with that, but now all of a sudden the light isn't working, right? I just want a light switch, right? Just give me a light switch, right? We don't I can call the electrician on that, but all of a sudden when we put something and it's integrated into a system, and then I call the electrician, they're like, that's yours, right? You have to deal with that, right? And so then we got to try to deal with it. And so, that's what scares me about all this, right? And I think it's great, but how do you sustain that long term as well?
Yeah. Well, this is an important issue, and actually, next week I'm going to be at the InfoComm 100 meeting, and the whole topic of this 3-day event is smart buildings. And what we've realized InfoComm is calling this initiative the Smart Building Imperative. Smart buildings are going to happen. It's imperative. The issue is, who's going to own the ball? Whose responsibility is it on the design team, the integration team, and the owner's team to do that? You can't get to net zero without a smart building. It just doesn't happen. So, we think we in the AV industry already deal with complexity every day. We deal with making all these disparate signals operate together. We deal with control protocols across the board and making them come together under one user interface. We already tie into lighting and shades, and certainly on the residential side, HVAC. We've just been doing it as a convenience, not as an energy-saving effort. And we think that our industry may be uniquely qualified versus, say, the electrician to get our arms around that level of complexity. But you're absolutely right that what actually happens is designs are half-baked. they're not really fully thought through from the building engineer standpoint. And so they work in silos, they don't harmonize with each other, and that causes problems for the owners. And that's what we at Infocom are trying to change with the Smart Building Imperative. Yeah?
That was a fantastic presentation, I
Thank you.
thought. And particularly, I know this is sort of off topic, but your use of your VGA content was outstanding. That was the best I've seen in a long
Thank you.
time. While I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about collaboration, because I think university and college campuses are going to become more about collaboration. I think you sort of said that. And I'm wondering, going out into the future, 20 or 30 years, we as humans need to collaborate. That's how we think. That's how we do what we do. Certainly industry shows that. And that's what we're going to do on university and colleges already are doing that. So here's my question. If we're all out in our dorm rooms, or the students are out in their dorm rooms and are in their homes and in their businesses watching classes, we need to see each other and talk to each other. So you're saying that about half the buildings on our campuses will be knocked down in maybe 50 years, 60 years. And then your plan here talks about building new buildings and doing these plans. Tell me how you see this working out into the future. The next 10 years, we continue to build buildings,
Right.
and over 30 or 40 years, we start knocking them down. I know that's a big idea, but maybe you can...
Well, you know, it hit me. I was in New York, Manhattan, a few weeks ago, and you know, you stand in Times Square, and you look at that built infrastructure, and you think, how my grandkids may not see a very different set of buildings than I see. It's just too many buildings. You know, the inventory of existing buildings is huge and vast, and it's very difficult to just replace them all. But what I think you can do over time, I mean, those buildings were designed and built in an era where energy was cheap, no one really thought about it, and they're horribly wasteful. But if every new building you build is a LEED Platinum step gold building, and it is, you know, energy efficient, maybe a net zero building, and you basically knock down responsibly and recycle your old buildings that are leaky sieves of heat and air and inefficient buildings, and slowly that mix changes. My bigger radical idea is I don't think we need as much campus. I think we could think about the delivery entirely different. And this was the forehead slap I had when I really sat and looked at Coursera for a day, is that, okay, we're not talking about, you know, just some small little for-profit institution. We're talking about the Ivy League schools of this country. If they can provide this content online, well, why would somebody pay $40,000 to go to some institution? Now, there's a lot of good things that happen when you go to college. My son goes to Georgia Tech. I wouldn't try to homeschool him in electrical engineering. That would hurt my brain. But, and it's a good experience to go to college. I just think the way we go about earning credit hours should be radically rethought in the digital era, the same way we radically rethought downloading movies and music and books. It's the same idea. So let's apply it to these massive carbon footprint institutions we call colleges and universities.
One of the things I've learned after, you know, putting up a couple new buildings and doing some major renovations is the people who have a lot of control over this are mechanical engineers and architects and architectural consulting firms. And my question is, how widely accepted is STEP there? How much effort is being put in there? Because if I take this to them and say, you have to be STEP, and they look at me, it's like, whatever.
Yeah.
And the mechanical engineer I never meet designs the HVAC system.
Exactly. And the dirty little secret of all this is their fees are going down year by year, not up. And if we want smart buildings, net zero buildings, it takes more effort. And more effort means more design fees. And if you say STEP to the architect for your new project, they're going to go, what are you talking about? So it is a bit of an uphill climb. What I will tell you is this. One of the people on the Smart Building Imperative Committee is a principal with Perkins & Will. Perkins & Will is the largest architecture firm in the world, and I wrote an article on this last month, or an interview with him. So he's been involved with STEP and with the Smart Building Imperative. And he basically said, I could see STEP supplanting LEED. LEED has just become habit. Architects know how to do LEED. They can do it in their sleep. But they're still not getting to their own challenge, which is the 2030 challenge. They have their own climate commitment. It's called Architecture 2030 to design net zero buildings by 2030. And they know they're not on the proper glide plane to get there. And this principal from Perkins & Will said, I think STEP could actually help us get there, where LEED only is getting us so far. So I do think if we can expose architects and engineers to it, they will understand that there's some value there. The challenge is they're going to say, well, am I getting paid extra to deal with all this stuff? And somebody at your facilities department has to say, yes, we will pay you extra to give us a smarter building because it's going to pay back in 5, 10 years, and then for the next 60 years, it's pure gravy for us. So those design fees are infinitesimally small compared to the overall operations of that building over 30 years. Yeah, Matthew.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Thanks for highlighting George Mason, by the way.
Sure. Do what I can.
So one question I have is when you get down to the ROI of this, and it's actually the barrier that I've had at George Mason getting into the classroom environment. Our basis cost for a classroom is $20,000 for an average technology classroom. I've actually done the design work. It cost me about $1,000 on top of that, about 5%, to put in the additional tech I would need to do a more active energy management program. I'm not going to see any return on anything I save because all energy costs are centrally captured. So that idea becomes dead on arrival with my management because of diminishing budgets, and if they're not going to see anything back, why should they, invest?
Right.
And we've kind of already got the freebie captures. We're already doing schedule management for our bulbs, so we're not actually going to see any additional return on things like bulb life saving or anything of that nature. So, any thoughts?
We have a problem certainly in this country where I do most of my work with the color of money. Operations money is this color and construction money is that color. It's still the same buck, but it's different departments, different people care about different things. And you're absolutely right. The construction budget for a new, science building doesn't really care about the fact that 10 years from now you're going to have hit break even and everything beyond that is gravy. This is where the President's climate commitment is your ace in the hole. You plop that guy on the table and say, why are we killing ourselves to go to carbon neutrality if not to make these small upfront investments to get there? Why are we just going to buy carbon offsets for the next 100 years because we can't spend $1,000 per classroom to monitor and manage this stuff actively? That's ridiculous. So, I would put that back on them all the way to the President's office. You signed this. This is you, man. I'm trying to help. and you have that hammer now that you probably didn't have a few years ago.
No, and actually, that metric's interesting. I actually will be sharing that with our sustainability officer because I think she'd find that a very interesting way of looking at things.
Yeah, and in terms of sharing, I'm going to put this presentation, this is Prezi, the software. I'm going to put this up on Prezi.com. If you either hand me your card afterwards or shoot me an email, I will be happy to give you the link to it. You can present from any computer online. You don't need the Prezi software. Or if you need a mobile version, I'll email you the portable Prezi file, but it's probably 20 megs, so just let me know how best to send that to you. But, this is not proprietary information that, I'm going to hold in a box. This is for everybody. So feel free to use it as you see fit. Hey, Mario.
How you doing? I know you were part of the AV 9000 group, the forum that came up with that de facto spec, and I know it's not an Infocom spec, but do you see value in the next revision of the AV 9000 spec to include in the commissioning test the measurement of the power consumption of the AV system?
Yeah.
So that this way at least you have either the third party or the second party verify what the exact power consumption is for the AV when it's all on.
Absolutely. We can't ignore the fact that these things consume energy over their lifetime. Obviously, they require energy to work, but how much do they consume, and what are we doing to manage that? So for a couple of years, I chaired the Infocom ANSI Standards Committee, and the last standard I launched before I handed the reins over to my friend Rich Derbyshire was to create an energy management standard, and that got released earlier this year. So Infocom, you can go on the website. There is an AV energy management standard that they worked on for years. Mario Maltese's group here, if you don't know Mario, you definitely need to get to know this guy. But he's got this AV quality assurance group that's out there trying to, we talked about it before the talk. There's all kinds of waste. waste in installation, waste of time, waste of truck rolls that didn't need to go to the job site because this stuff should have been handled at commissioning. So, you know, carbon is carbon. And the more efficient, the more streamlined we can make the design, the more it is standardized and robust and works, the more we can remotely troubleshoot it. That's all green stuff. It's not just, you know, Energy Star or LEED. There's a broader world out there. We just have to open our minds to any type of waste and wring it out of the system. So, absolutely.
I guess that's it. Scott, you know, thank you very much. It was a great presentation.
Thanks, guys.
So I think we're done. We've got a concurrent session starting in about 25 minutes. And I did forget one thing. So make sure you bring your vouchers with you. So for those of you that bought the zip line tickets, make sure you bring your vouchers. And we also had the waiver forms as well. So if you pre-fill those out, that'll save you some time. So get those waiver forms filled out. So thank you very much.